My name is Dana Whitfield. I turned 33 years old at my mother's dining room table, and the candles hadn't even been lit yet when my mother leaned toward my father and whispered, just loud enough for me to catch every word, "Since everyone's here, have Tyler go change the locks at her place tonight." Her place. Mine. The townhouse I bought with my own down payment. The one my 8-year-old daughter sleeps in every single night. My father nodded at his plate without looking up. My brother Tyler set down his fork, muttered something about needing to make a call, and walked out to his truck with his key ring jingling in his fist. Everyone else at that table kept right on passing the green beans. I smiled. I complimented my mother's pot roast. And 40 minutes later, my brother came back through that front door white as a bedsheet, bent down to my mother's ear, and whispered 5 words I will never forget: "Mom, there were police." He never got to finish that sentence. Here's what nobody sitting at that table understood: I already knew exactly what was waiting for him in my parking lot, because I had spent the previous 7 weeks quietly building it, piece by piece, starting with a declined debit card at a pharmacy counter that cracked open a door I didn't even know existed, a door that led straight into a manila folder hidden in my mother's china cabinet, and into 12 years of a fraud I never saw coming from the 2 people who raised me. I'm going to walk you through this whole thing from the very beginning, because the beginning is where a lot of you are going to recognize yourselves. If you've ever been the one who fixes everything, the one everybody calls when the furnace dies or the insurance lapses, but the one nobody ever thinks to call just to ask how you're doing, stay with me. This story gets very, very satisfying. If stories about quiet, responsible women finally standing up for themselves are your thing, hit subscribe now, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of story, and this is one of the wildest ones I've ever told. Let me tell you who I was before any of this started, because it matters more than the money ever will. I'm a physical therapist at a rehab clinic here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I specialize in post-surgical recovery, hips, knees, spines, which means every day I watch people relearn how to trust their own bodies again. It's slow, patient work, and I'm good at it because I've had a lot of practice being patient with people who don't trust easily. My daughter Maya was 8 that summer, all missing teeth and endless questions, learning to do cartwheels in the little strip of grass behind my townhouse while my neighbor Frank cheered her on from his lawn chair like she was competing in the Olympics. Frank Ovitz is 71, a retired postal inspector, 31 years chasing mail fraud before he retired, with a gray tabby cat named Chief who supervises the whole cul-de-sac from the porch railing. I bought that townhouse in 2019, my first place that was ever entirely, only mine, and I can still remember exactly what it felt like turning the key in that lock for the first time. Every other Sunday, I drove across the county to my parents' house for family dinner, because Sunday dinner existed on my mother's calendar the way certain holidays exist on a church calendar, fixed, non-negotiable, sacred. That particular week, she called me 3 separate times about my upcoming birthday. "We're doing something special this year, honey. Just family." There was a warmth in her voice I genuinely hadn't heard directed at me in years, and I remember standing at my kitchen sink with the phone tucked against my shoulder, frowning at nothing in particular. My mother had not thrown me a birthday dinner since I turned 16. I told myself people mellow with age. I told myself 63 does that to a person. Then I rinsed a dish, checked on Maya's homework, and folded the thought away the way you fold a sweater you know you're never actually going to wear again. 3 days later, a grocery store card reader would unfold that thought right back out. You should understand what my actual role in this family was, because it was never really daughter, it was fixer. At 17, I was the one reading the electric bill out loud at the kitchen table because my father's eyes were, in his words, too tired for small print. At 20, I filed my parents' taxes for the very first time, and I did it every single spring after that without being asked twice. I organized my father's blood pressure medication into a little labeled pill box every Sunday. When the water heater died, when the car insurance lapsed, when Tyler's landlord threatened eviction, the phone rang, and it rang in my pocket. My mother had a phrase for this arrangement, and she delivered it like a small blessing every single time. That's just what family does for each other. Looking back now, I can count exactly 3 times in my adult life that sentence was ever said to me without a favor attached to it. Here's the strange part, the part I'm still a little embarrassed to admit out loud. I handled everyone's important paperwork in that family except my own. When I turned 19, my father set up a small gray fireproof lockbox in his home office and told me he'd keep my important documents safe in it: my birth certificate, my social security card, a small savings bond my grandmother had left me. At the time, it felt like being cared for. I was a scholarship student working weekend shifts at a diner to get through my physical therapy program, and I liked believing somebody else was minding the deep, boring paperwork so I could focus on the rest of my life. I paid my rent, and later my mortgage, always on time, through my little local credit union, and I never once, not one single time in over a decade, pulled my own credit report. I know exactly how that sounds coming from a woman whose entire job depends on careful, methodical assessment. But you don't audit the people who taught you to ride a bike. You just keep showing up every other Sunday, passing the green beans, doing their taxes every April like clockwork. It took me 12 years to learn what else was living inside that gray box besides my birth certificate. It took exactly one declined debit card to start teaching me. It happened on a Thursday afternoon at the Harris Teeter on Selwyn Avenue. Maya had a double ear infection, and I was standing at the pharmacy counter with her antibiotics in one hand and my debit card in the other when the reader flashed a single word in gray letters: declined. I ran it again. Declined again. My backup card, the one I keep tucked away specifically for emergencies, came back with a message I'd never seen before: suspected fraud, call issuer. There was a line building behind me, a teenager clutching 2 energy drinks, an older man leaning on a cane, all of them very politely studying the gum display while my face went hot with embarrassment. I paid with the crumpled bills at the bottom of my purse, got Maya her medicine, and sat in my parked car in the lot doing the thing I do at work when a patient panics mid-session. Slow breath. Look at the actual data, not the fear. That night, once Maya was finally asleep, I did the thing I'd been putting off for years. I signed up for one of those free credit monitoring apps. It pulled my file, and I sat there in my kitchen reading my own name attached to information I did not recognize at all. There was a credit card on my report, opened in 2018. I have never in my life applied for that card. Balance, $5,200. Status, 62 days past due. That single delinquent account had dragged my credit score off a cliff, which is exactly why a physical therapist with a completely spotless payment history had just been publicly humiliated over an $11 prescription copay. My hands, for the record, were completely steady while I read that. 12 years of clinical work will do that to a person. But when I clicked into the account details expecting to find some stranger's address in another state entirely, what came up instead was a house I know better than any other building on earth, because I grew up inside it. I did what you're supposed to do, in the order you're supposed to do it. Friday morning I called the bank that had issued that mystery credit card, sat through 15 minutes of hold music, and told the fraud department, calmly and clearly, that this account was not mine. I placed a 90-day fraud alert on my credit file. I requested certified copies of the original application and every statement ever generated on it. The representative I spoke with was patient and thorough, and near the end of the call, she read me the phone number listed as the primary contact on the account, just to confirm it wasn't mine. It wasn't my number. It was a landline. I could have recited it from memory in my sleep, because it has been my parents' kitchen phone since I was in middle school. I thanked her in my calm, professional voice, hung up, and stared at my own reflection in the dark screen of my microwave for a long moment. And a memory surfaced that I hadn't touched in years. When I was 26, a few months after Maya was born, I'd gotten a letter about a credit inquiry I didn't recognize. I actually did ask about it back then. I drove out to my parents' house with the letter tucked in my diaper bag and set it on the kitchen table. My father chuckled, pulled a folded page out of that gray lockbox in his office, and showed me bank letterhead, an apology, something about a clerical error already resolved. My mother patted my hand and said, "Bank mistake, sweetheart. Your father already took care of it." "You've got a newborn, go worry about him instead." The alert I'd set back then simply expired on its own 90 days later, the way they always do, unrenewed. I remember thinking at the time that the letter had looked slightly off, the paper a little too glossy, the logo a shade too saturated, and then Maya cried, and I let the thought go. Sitting in my kitchen 7 years later, I finally let myself finish that thought. Sitting in my kitchen 7 years later, I finally let myself finish that thought. Saturday morning, Frank was out front replacing a rusted hinge on the shared gate that our HOA had been ignoring since spring, because Frank fixes things the way other retired men watch golf. I held the gate steady for him while he worked, and Chief the cat supervised us both from the porch railing. Frank told me a story from his postal inspector days, about a mail fraud case from the 90s where a man had opened 3 credit cards in his own elderly mother's name and mailed the statements to a P.O. box 2 towns over so she'd never see a single one. 31 years chasing that kind of thing taught me exactly one thing, kiddo, he said, tightening the last screw. Paper never lies. People do. I came within one single breath of telling him everything, right there at that gate. I had the sentence loaded and ready. Something strange is happening with my accounts. I could feel how good it would have felt to hand that weight to somebody with steady hands and 31 years of experience finding exactly this kind of thing. But I have been the strong one in every room I've ever stood in for so long that asking for help still feels, to this day, like getting undressed in public. So I said something about the gate hinge instead. My phone rang while Frank was still holding the screwdriver, and I answered without checking the screen. My mother's voice came through bright as a bell. "You're free Saturday for your birthday, right?" "Oh wait, did I tell you we moved it to Thursday?" She had not told me. She talked for another 4 minutes about a cake from a bakery downtown, about how my Aunt Pam was driving in, about family being together, and I stood there watching Chief nap in a sunbeam, feeling the hair rise on my arms. My mother had not baked, bought, or so much as acknowledged a birthday cake for me in almost 17 years. Now she was calling twice a week about one. Frank watched me hang up. "Everything all right?" he asked. "I'm honestly not sure yet," I told him, and it was the truest sentence I'd said out loud in a month. I had no idea I'd just described the next 7 weeks of my life exactly. Sunday night I picked up a rare overnight shift covering for a colleague at an urgent care clinic across town, and slow overnight hours meant I finally had time to sit down properly. On my break, I requested my full credit reports from all 3 major bureaus, the real ones, not the app version. 40-some pages printed off the breakroom machine, and I read them the way I read a new patient's chart. Fast first, to get the shape of it. Then slow, to catch what the shape was hiding. It was worse than one stray credit card. There was a store card opened in 2015. Another credit card in 2017. A personal loan taken out in 2019, $8,000, paid off in full and closed a year later, like a perfectly healthy, well-behaved little loan. 2 more cards opened in 2021 and 2022. Some accounts were long dead and buried, closed and paid off. Others were very much alive and still accumulating interest. 8 accounts total, spanning 9 years of my adult life, none of which I had ever opened, all of them wearing my name like a coat that had been borrowed without asking. I made myself a list using the color-coded pens I use for patient treatment plans, and the dates lined themselves up into a shape I did not want to look at directly. The very first account had been opened in August of 2015. I graduated from my physical therapy program in August of 2015. It was the exact same month I carried the last of my boxes out of my parents' house and into my very first apartment, 22 years old, so proud of that new key that I put it on its own separate keyring. Somebody had apparently waited until I moved out, and then, that same month, quietly opened a new door behind me with my own name stitched onto it. I sat in that break room with my cold coffee and my 40 printed pages, and one of the other night shift techs stuck her head in to ask if I was all right. I told her I was reading up on something for work. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was reading 9 years of my own life, written in somebody else's hand. Over the following 3 days, I turned my kitchen table into what could only be described as a caseboard. Every account got its own row: date opened, current balance, current status. The totals came out cold and exact, exactly the way I like numbers to behave. $11,600 in open balances currently sitting under my name and quietly wrecking my credit. And one detail repeated down the entire page like a slow, steady heartbeat: every single statement, on every single account, was mailed to the same address. Not my old apartment. Not my current townhouse. My childhood home. For 9 straight years, every bill, every late notice, every important changes to your account envelope had been delivered directly into my childhood bedroom, where I couldn't possibly see any of it, and where somebody else absolutely could. That's the moment the thing I'd been quietly calling a mystery turned, in my head, into a method. That letter I'd gotten at 26 hadn't been an isolated error. It had been a near miss, the one time a notice slipped out to my real address, handled that same afternoon with letterhead that was just a shade too glossy. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote down the only 2 names in this entire world who fit every single fact. Who had held my social security number since the day I was born? Who kept my important documents locked in a box in their own home office? Who controlled the mailbox at that address? Who answered that landline? Over the following 3 days, I turned my kitchen table into what could only be described as a caseboard. Every account got its own row: date opened, current balance, current status. The totals came out cold and exact, exactly the way I like numbers to behave. $11,600 in open balances currently sitting under my name and quietly wrecking my credit. And one detail repeated down the entire page like a slow, steady heartbeat: every single statement, on every single account, was mailed to the same address. Not my old apartment. Not my current townhouse. My childhood home. For 9 straight years, every bill, every late notice, every important changes to your account envelope had been delivered directly into my childhood bedroom, where I couldn't possibly see any of it, and where somebody else absolutely could. That's the moment the thing I'd been quietly calling a mystery turned, in my head, into a method. That letter I'd gotten at 26 hadn't been an isolated error. It had been a near miss, the one time a notice slipped out to my real address, handled that same afternoon with letterhead that was just a shade too glossy. I pulled out a legal pad and wrote down the only 2 names in this entire world who fit every single fact. Who had held my social security number since the day I was born? Who kept my important documents locked in a box in their own home office? Who controlled the mailbox at that address? Who answered that landline? I wrote the names down. Then I scratched them out. Then I wrote them again, and this time my hand wasn't steady at all, and I'm putting that on the record too. My parents. I sat there for a long while listening to my refrigerator hum its one flat note. Then I squared the pages, clipped them together, and slid them into a plain folder, because in my job, when the numbers say something you desperately don't want them to say, you don't argue with the numbers. You order more tests. My coworker Nikki found me at shift change with that folder tucked under my arm, and she read my face the way people in our line of work learn to read faces. I gave her the short version, standing in the stairwell. Her advice was immediate and completely human: just call your mom. Ask her straight out. Maybe there's an explanation. I loved her for saying it. But I heard myself answer in my calm clinical voice: you don't wake a patient up to ask if they're bleeding. You check the chart first. If I called my mother right then, I'd get tears, a story, and, I was already fairly certain, a bonfire of paperwork by morning. So I chose the quiet road instead. I filed nothing publicly yet. Said nothing at the next family dinner. Changed absolutely nothing about my voice or my face. But that week, I placed a full credit freeze on my file at all 3 bureaus, not just an alert this time. A freeze, the kind where nothing new can open at all without a pin that only I hold. It felt, for the first time in my adult life, like locking a door from the inside. 2 days later my phone rang. My mother, and her voice had lost a little of its usual sweetness. "Dana, what did you do with the bank?" Somebody called your father about a verification and it wouldn't go through. She said it lightly, wrapped in a little laugh. Bureaucrats these days. I looked out my kitchen window at the parking lot and asked, pleasantly, which bank was that, Mom? She moved right past the question like it was furniture in her way. And there it was, the very first loose thread. My freeze was invisible. Private. Brand new. And somehow, within 48 hours, it had already inconvenienced my mother. If you've ever sat across a table from someone you love, holding a question that could burn the whole house down if you asked it out loud, you already know exactly the silence I'm describing. Tell me in the comments how long you carried yours before you finally asked. Because mine was about to get a lot heavier before it got lighter, starting with what I found at the county recorder's office. After that phone call, I stopped being a daughter with a bad feeling and became, fully, what I actually am, a professional who documents everything. I bought a 3-ring binder and a pack of colored tabs from the office supply store and built my case exactly the way I build a treatment file. Nothing goes in without a source. Green tabs for accounts. Yellow tabs for dates. Red tabs for anything that touched actual money in motion. On the inside of my bedroom closet door, where Maya would never see it, I taped up a timeline, 2015 at the top, present day at the bottom, index cards for every event I could actually prove with a real document. My rule was simple and it never once bent: if I couldn't hold a piece of paper that proved it happened, it did not go on that wall. Feelings don't survive a proper cross-examination. Paper does. It was the personal loan that stopped me cold that week. $8,000, opened and disbursed in April of 2019, paid off faithfully, closed on schedule. A model little loan, exactly the kind that quietly builds somebody's credit score. Somebody had opened it, fed it, and buried it neatly. I stood at my closet door with the index card in my hand, trying to place April 2019 in my own memory, and then I didn't have to try anymore. I was in a car accident in April of 2019. A driver ran a red light on Providence Road and hit me broadside. I spent 9 days at the medical center with 2 fractured ribs, a concussion, and a blood pressure cuff on my arm, being told by every nurse on that floor not to stand up too fast. While I was learning to walk to the bathroom again with a walker, somebody was apparently signing my name across town for $8,000. I pinned that card to the timeline and wrote one question underneath it in red ink: what else did I sign during those 9 days? I didn't know yet that the county keeps the answer to that exact question in a filing cabinet downtown, and that it costs $3 to photocopy. That week's family dinner was a masterclass, and I attended it like an anthropologist observing a culture I'd only just realized I'd never actually understood. My mother ran the table the way she runs everything, conducting forks and conversation with the same practiced wrist. Extra potatoes for my father. Tyler came in 20 minutes late in his work boots and got his plate warmed without even having to ask. My mother asked about my clinic hours in a way that wasn't really asking, mentioned my townhouse was so far from family, which is a strange thing to call a 14-minute drive, and reminded the whole table that the bakery needed a final head count for my birthday cake. My father peeled the label off his beer bottle and contributed exactly 2 comments about the weather. I watched them all pass dishes around that table and thought, quite clearly, $11,600, and you're worried about the head count. Near the end of dinner, I mentioned, as casually as I could manage, that some of my mail had apparently been going to their house by mistake, old habit from college, probably, and could they just start handing it to me unopened going forward, since I'd been missing a few things. The table did a small, polite little freeze. My mother smiled with her entire face except her eyes. "Family doesn't need permission, sweetheart," she said, and speared a carrot. Not a denial. Not an apology. A policy statement. I smiled back and said, "Of course, silly me." And inside, something quietly clicked into place, like a joint settling back into its socket. On my way to the kitchen with the dishes, I passed the glass front china cabinet, the one with the good plates nobody actually eats off, and I saw it. A manila folder lying flat under a stack of good napkins, one worn corner sticking out, soft the way paper gets when it's been handled over and over again. I had my hand on the cabinet door when my mother appeared beside me and closed it smooth as a curtain. "Those napkins are for the holidays," she said. It was July. The birthday planning got stranger from there, and I let it, because you learn a great deal by simply letting people keep talking. My mother called Thursday to confirm Sunday, family only, just us and Aunt Pam and the cousins, and then mid-sentence took a detour I've replayed in my head 100 times since. "You still keep your important papers in that little fireproof box, don't you? The gray one from Target?" I gave some non-committal answer. She pressed, light as powdered sugar. "Well, you should. With you working those long clinic hours and Maya at school all day, papers should really be locked up somewhere safe. Does anyone keep an eye on the townhouse while you're both out?" I told her Frank kept an eye on things, which she waved off entirely. "That old man with the cat." And then she offered, generous as a queen, to take Maya overnight the night of my birthday dinner. "So you can actually relax, honey. Have a glass of wine. She can sleep in Tyler's old room." Every cell in my body that has ever responded to a code blue went quiet and cold, all at once. I thanked her and told her Maya already had a sleepover planned with a friend's family, which wasn't true yet but became true exactly one phone call later. When I hung up, I wrote 3 new index cards for the closet door. 1. Mom asked about the firebox. 2. Mom asked who watches the townhouse. 3. Mom wants Maya out of my house on birthday night. I stood back and looked at the wall for a long time, and the wall looked back, and neither of us could name the shape of it yet. That's the honest truth. I want to be clear that I didn't see the whole plan coming. I only saw pieces sliding slowly toward each other in the dark. What I did know, with total certainty, was smaller and much sharper than any theory. My mother had never once, in 33 years, cared where I kept my important papers. Now it was the second thing she asked about, right after the cake order. Monday morning, instead of sleeping after a night shift, I drove downtown to the county recorder's office with a coffee and a hunch. If somebody had genuinely been moving money in my name for 9 years, there might be a piece of paper with an official stamp on it somewhere, because banks and lenders love stamps. I gave the clerk my name and $3, and she handed me the answer to the red ink question taped to my closet door. It was a power of attorney. General, durable, financial. Grantor, Dana Whitfield. Attorneys in fact, Harold and Renata Whitfield, jointly and severally, with full authority over accounts, loans, and property. Signed and notarized on April 9, 2019, at a notary's office clear across town, a 35-minute drive from the medical center where I was, according to my own hospital records, admitted with 2 fractured ribs and a concussion. I stood at that counter and read my own signature. A good signature. Confident. Looped exactly the way I actually loop my letters. Dated on a day when I could not walk to a bathroom without a nurse holding my elbow. According to the county, on April 9, 2019, I was somehow also standing across town in front of a notary, cheerfully signing my entire financial life over to my own parents. The document had 2 witness lines, the way North Carolina requires. The first name I didn't recognize at all. The second name, though, I recognized instantly, and it knocked the wind out of me harder than the actual car accident had, for years earlier. The second witness line read, Tyler Harold Whitfield. My brother. My brother, who I had ridden to soccer practice with 1,000 times, who taught me to parallel park in an empty church lot, had apparently stood in front of a notary 4 years earlier and sworn, on paper, that he personally watched me sign away control of my entire financial life, while I was, in reality, lying in a hospital bed 12 miles away with a monitor clipped to my finger. I paid for 3 certified copies and sat in my car in the recorder's office parking lot for a long time before I trusted myself to drive. A power of attorney is a skeleton key, and once I knew this one existed, the entire 9-year pattern reorganized itself around it instantly. The 2019 personal loan, the POA had authorized it. The address changes on every account, all routed to a landline that answered to my parents, the POA explained that too. Banks don't ask very many follow-up questions when you hand them a properly notarized legal document. That is, quite literally, the entire point of a notarized document. I spent the next 2 evenings matching dates across the whole binder, and every single major account action after April 2019 sat downstream of that one piece of paper, the way small towns sit downstream of a dam. Then I called my own credit union, the small local one where I'd gotten my mortgage, because I needed to hear, out loud, from a real human being, that my actual home was safe. The loan officer, a kind older man named Dennis who keeps a jar of butterscotch candies on his desk for every single customer, pulled my file and reassured me. Mortgage current. Title clean. Nothing unusual on file. And then, because small credit unions tend to be chatty places, he added one more detail almost as an afterthought. Funny thing, though, we got a verification request on your property value last month, from another lender. Routine enough, but I didn't recognize the company. I asked what kind of verification. Asset and lien check, he said. The kind that comes through when somebody's underwriting a new loan. I thanked Dennis, hung up, and sat very still at my kitchen table while my refrigerator hummed its one flat note. Everything else in my binder was history. Money already taken. Doors already closed behind me years ago. This was different. Underwriting is a present tense word. Somewhere out there, right now, a lender I had never once heard of was actively checking what my townhouse was worth and what was still owed on it, which happens for exactly one reason. Something new was actively being built in my name, and it wasn't finished yet. For the first time in almost 6 weeks, I wasn't investigating a crime that had already happened. I was standing in the middle of one still in progress. I want to be honest with you about the cost of all this, because it matters more than any of the paperwork does. That Friday, Maya wandered into my room while I was updating the closet door and asked why Mommy had a puzzle taped up where her sweaters usually hang. I told her it was a matching game for work, and she accepted that the way 8-year-olds accept most adult explanations, and asked if she could have the red marker once I was done with it. I said yes, she patted off happily, and I closed the closet door and stood in my bathroom with both hands braced on the sink for a long, long time. It wasn't the money doing that to me. I've been genuinely broke before, back in school. Broke is survivable, broke has protocols. It was the arithmetic of trust that broke something loose in my chest. 9 years of Sunday dinners. Call it roughly 230 pot roasts, give or take. And through every single one of them, the 2 people sitting at the head of that table knew exactly what was being written under my name, and let me pass the green beans anyway. I kept thinking, oddly, about my grandmother, my father's mother, Eleanor, gone since 2020. A blunt, sharp little woman who drove her own Buick until she was 81 and kept butterscotch candies in her coat pocket for Maya, same brand as Dennis at the credit union, which I only noticed years later and found strangely comforting. Near the end of her life, living out her final months at my parents' house, she'd grabbed my wrist once at their kitchen table and said, apropos of absolutely nothing, "This family eats its quiet ones, Dana. Don't you be quiet the wrong way." I'd laughed it off at the time, kissed the top of her head, and topped off her tea. Standing at my bathroom sink years later, I finally heard that sentence exactly the way she'd meant it, a warning, passed carefully from one quiet person to the next. The next morning I washed my face, made pancakes, watched 2 episodes of a cartoon with my daughter, and bought a second pack of index cards on my way to work. There would be exactly one night of standing at that sink feeling like the floor had opened up. That was my budget, and I stuck to it. And that same weekend, a retired postal inspector who happened to live 3 doors down came to me before I ever worked up the nerve to go to him, which tells you absolutely everything you need to know about Frank. Sunday evening he knocked 2 sharp raps on my door, Postal Inspector Knox, still, after 31 years of retirement, and stood on my mat with Chief winding around his ankles and a look on his face I recognized immediately from work. Bad news, delivered carefully. Might be nothing, he said. But there's a dark green sedan that's rolled through this lot twice this week. Slow, on Tuesday, and again this morning. Fella in it took pictures of your front door. Both doors, actually, front and the one off the patio. I asked how he could possibly know it was specifically my door and not just the building in general. Frank gave me the look that 31 years of federal investigative work gives a person. Because I watched him line up the shot, kiddo. He photographed your actual lock. He'd written the plate number down on the back of a hardware store receipt, purely out of habit, the way other retired men hum tunes without noticing they're doing it. I stood there holding that receipt, and the wall I'd built between my private mess and the rest of the world quietly gave out. I invited him in, put on coffee, and told him a version of the whole truth. Accounts opened in my name. A power of attorney that couldn't possibly be real. My own mother asking oddly specific questions about my fireproof lockbox. Frank listened the way good investigators listen, completely still, no twitching, no interrupting. When I finished, he said the single most useful sentence anyone had offered me in 6 weeks. You don't need a shoulder right now, Dana. You need a case number. Then he made one phone call to an old contact still working, read off the plate number, said aha twice, and hung up. Registered to a business, he told me. Locksmith outfit over on the east side. Commercial account. We looked at each other across my kitchen table. I had a binder full of past tense crimes, and now, sitting right in front of me, one very present tense mystery, a locksmith photographing my deadbolt. Neither of us could make the two pieces fit together yet. Chief sighed dramatically under the table like he'd already seen this exact case play out somewhere before and knew precisely how it ended. The Financial Crimes Unit at the County Sheriff's Department operates out of a low-ceilinged room that smells permanently of burnt coffee, and Detective Priya Anand turned out to be a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and a handshake like a filing cabinet drawer sliding shut. I handed her the binder and said as little as I possibly could, which she seemed to genuinely appreciate. She read for nearly 25 minutes without saying a single word, flipping back and forth, flattening pages with her palm, while I sat there with my hands folded, feeling the very specific vertigo of watching a total stranger read the private architecture of your life. Her first question, when it finally came, wasn't about my parents at all. Who else has copies of this? A safe deposit box, I told her. She nodded once, the same way I nod when a new therapist on my team does something exactly right on the first try. Then she moved through her questions in tight, efficient rows. Who else knew? Whether I'd confronted anyone directly. No confrontation yet, I told her. Nothing had changed in my voice at family dinners. Detective Anand looked at me over her glasses for a moment. That's unusual, she said. Most people can't hold a face like that for 6 weeks. I told her I professionally coach patients through pain every single day. Holding steady is essentially the job description. Then she did the thing that changed the temperature of the entire room. She slid one page back across the table toward me, Dennis's note about the mystery verification request, and tapped it twice with one finger. All of this, she said, gesturing at 9 years' worth of binder, is history. Prosecutable, probably, but history. This page is different. I waited. Somebody ordered an asset check on your property last month. That's underwriting behavior. Underwriting means money that hasn't moved yet. She took off her glasses and looked directly at me. Ms. Whitfield, this isn't really a case about what your parents already did. It's a case about what they're doing right now. She kept the binder. I drove home with the windows down for the entire 14-minute drive, and for the first time in 6 weeks I felt the current underneath everything finally start pulling the other direction. Hook, 3 days later, Detective Anand called me at the clinic with the number that made this whole thing suddenly, terrifyingly real, and a deadline that lined up exactly with a date my own mother had already given me, wrapped in frosting, over the phone. Detective Anand called 3 days later, no preamble at all, which I already loved about her. We found the thing that's actively in motion, she said. There's a home equity loan currently in underwriting at a regional lender. Borrower of record, Dana Whitfield. Collateral, your townhouse on Selwyn Court. Application signed under the 2019 power of attorney. I asked how much. $82,000. That number went straight through me, cold and clean, like ice water in my veins. $82,000 against the only door that had ever been entirely mine, secured by a document forged while I was lying in a hospital bed with a concussion. There's more, and I need you steady for this next part, she said. The loan is scheduled to close and fund this coming Thursday. Thursday. My mother had told me, weeks earlier, wrapped entirely in cake talk, that she was moving my birthday dinner to Thursday. She had told me the deadline herself, 10 days in advance, without having the slightest idea what she was actually telling me. Detective Anand walked me through the plan, and I stood very still in the clinic supply closet and listened. The lender's fraud department already had my sworn affidavit on file. The loan itself was already flagged, effectively frozen from the inside, dead in the water, but nothing about it would look frozen from the outside. No warning letters. No phone calls. No alarms of any kind. The application would keep showing clear to close right up until the moment somebody physically walked into that lender's office Thursday morning to sign final documents and collect certified funds. We let it look alive, she said. Frozen solid 3 days before your birthday, and the people who built it have absolutely no idea they're already standing on thin ice. I signed a supplemental affidavit that same afternoon, the one that finally names names, in ink, under oath. Driving home, I did the math the way I calculate a medication dosage. The loan effectively dies Thursday. My birthday dinner is Sunday, 4 days earlier. Whatever my mother still needed to pull out of my townhouse before that closing, whatever documents she still needed from inside my walls, she now had roughly 72 hours to get it. And she had already reserved the table. Between clinic shifts that week, I finally sat down with the photos I'd managed to get of that manila folder in the china cabinet. I'll explain exactly how I got those photos in a moment, including a set of bank statements I hadn't fully understood the first time I saw them, and gave them the careful reading they deserved. My grandmother Eleanor had spent her final 2 years living at my parents' house, officially so my mother could look after her. I remembered those years now in fragments, Eleanor seeming smaller at every visit, her beloved Buick eventually sold, her butterscotch supply running thinner and thinner. I remembered her fretting, more than once, that her teacher's pension seemed to be coming up short every month. And I remembered, this is the part that genuinely sits heavy in my chest even now, the whole family chuckling about it warmly. Grandma's getting a little forgetful, bless her heart. I chuckled along too, at the time. I was 29 and exhausted, and it was simply easier to believe in a fading memory than in a feeding hand. The bank statements did not chuckle. They showed a pattern as steady and predictable as a tide chart. Withdrawals, month after month, from an account with a caregiver debit card attached, small enough at first to look exactly like ordinary groceries, steady enough over time to genuinely add up. I ran the columns twice using the same calculator I use for patient billing. $19,000 over her final 2 years, drawn out of a retired schoolteacher's modest pension in small, careful bites. The very last withdrawal cleared 5 days before she passed away. 5 days. I put my phone down and sat with that fact for a long while. Here's what I need you to understand about my grandmother: she wasn't forgetful. The proof of that was sitting 1 floor above my own head in this very house. A $32,000 certificate of deposit she had locked away years earlier, the one absolutely nobody could touch without her own signature in person, the one that came to me in her will and became the down payment on my townhouse. She hadn't lost her money at all. She had hidden the very last of it from her own daughter-in-law in the only vault she still trusted completely. And then she had quietly handed that vault to me. I owed my grandmother Eleanor an apology I could only deliver in one way now, with receipts. I added her statements to my binder behind a brand new tab, and I made that one red. There was one more document buried in that same folder that I haven't told you about yet, because I needed to sit with it privately first. It explained, in my father's own blocky handwriting, exactly how all of this began, and exactly why he never once stopped it. I need to back up here and tell you how I actually got inside that china cabinet, because it happened almost by accident, on an ordinary Tuesday, weeks before any of this became official. I'd stayed late one evening helping clear dishes after dinner, which surprised absolutely nobody, because the fixer always stays. My mother took a phone call out on the back porch, her voice dropping low as the sliding door closed behind her, and my father settled into his recliner for the evening news. For 4, maybe 5 minutes, I was completely alone in that dining room with the china cabinet. I'm not going to dress this up or make it sound noble. I opened my mother's cabinet and I looked, because by that point I had absolutely earned the looking. The manila folder was still there, soft at the corners from years of handling, and inside it was my name over and over. Page after page of ruled notebook paper, and on every single line, in ink that changed shade as the years passed, one signature practiced again and again. Dana Whitfield. Dana Whitfield. Dana Whitfield. The earliest pages were clumsy, the loops too fat, the crossbar on the T at the wrong slant entirely. By the final pages, it was flawless. Smoother, honestly, than my actual signature looks after a 16-hour shift. Page after page of my own name, practiced like piano scales, until the forgery played better than the original ever had. I stood in my mother's dining room holding proof that none of this had ever been a single impulsive mistake, never desperation during one bad month. This had been rehearsal. Somebody had sat at a table, quite possibly this very table, and trained. Underneath the practice sheets sat more bank statements, neatly clipped, and the name printed on them stopped my breath in a completely different way. Eleanor Whitfield. My grandmother. Statements from 2018, 2019, 2020, her final 2 years. I heard the porch door begin to slide open. I photographed everything my phone could possibly hold, the practice pages, the statements, the folder itself lying exactly where it had been. Then I squared the napkins, closed the glass, and was already back to drying a roasting pan when my mother walked in, still glowing from her call. "You didn't have to stay so late, honey." I told her it was nothing. "That's just what family does," I said, and she smiled at me like I'd finally learned the family motto correctly. Driving home that night, I understood, in a distant, almost clinical way, that I had just built a trap without yet knowing who would eventually walk into it, or when. That answer arrived exactly 10 days later, delivered by phone, wrapped in cake talk. Now, back to that final document, the one buried at the very bottom of the folder, dated years before any of the credit cards. Someone had kept a small private archive from 2012. A foreclosure notice, printed and copied, from my father's small hardware store on Independence Boulevard. And behind it, a handwritten draft of a letter, in my father's own blocky pencil, addressed to a loan officer at his bank. I read it twice and had to stop both times. My father, a man I have genuinely never once heard raise his voice or finish an uncomfortable sentence in front of the family, was begging on that page. Misspelled words, crossed out and rewritten. He'd take any repayment terms, work any schedule, if they'd only let him keep the store, because his mother was living with them by then and his kids shouldn't have to change schools over it. And in the margin, in my mother's handwriting, small and final as a rubber stamp, "Stop begging. I'll handle it from here." I know exactly what that margin note actually was. It was a coronation. Somewhere back in 2012, my father knelt down in pencil, and my mother simply stepped over him and quietly took over the family's books for good. And he was so profoundly relieved to be spared the shame of that failure that he apparently never once asked how she handled anything, ever again, for the rest of their marriage. It explains him completely, the peeling beer label, the weather small talk, the eyes that always slide toward the floor whenever money comes up. For about a minute at my own kitchen table, I genuinely felt sorry for my father. A drowning man grabbing the first rope thrown to him, even one with a hook buried inside it. But here's exactly where I landed on it, and I want to say this part carefully, because it's really the whole spine of this entire story. Shame explains the very first signature. It does not explain the next 11 years of them. Every single April, every quiet renewal, every bank error, sweetheart, my father chose the silence again and again. Drowning men get exactly one free grab at the rope. After that, they're simply swimming along with the current that's actively pulling their own daughter under. With 4 days left until that home equity loan was set to close, I finally sat down at my kitchen table with a retired postal inspector and a county detective to plan out exactly how my own birthday dinner was going to go, and none of us yet knew that the deepest part of the plan was already being written, that same week, by my own family, without a single one of us having to lift a finger to arrange it. You want to know what dramatic irony actually tastes like? It tastes like wedding-grade sweetness poured through a phone speaker while you stand in your own kitchen already knowing everything. My mother called Monday, 4 days before the dinner, to walk me through the whole itinerary like a cruise director. Dinner at 6:30, because my father gets irritable if the roast has to wait. The cake would be picked up at 4, chocolate, 3 layers, Aunt Pam bringing her own good candles. The cousins would arrive around 6. Just family, sweetheart. Everyone under one roof, the way it should be. Then, gliding midstream into a sentence she'd clearly been building the entire call to disguise, and Thursday morning, your father and I have our little bank appointment. And after that, honey, everything is going to feel so much lighter around here. I can just feel it. So much lighter. I looked out my window at the parking lot where Maya's scooter lay tipped over in the grass, and I kept my voice in its lane, the exact way I do when a patient's family asks if their father is going to walk again and the honest answer is no. That sounds great, Mom. Chocolate's perfect. She talked for 3 more minutes. I supplied the right murmurs at the right intervals. When she finally rang off, I stood there holding the warm phone, feeling the strangest cocktail of my entire life, fury and pity, shaken together over ice. She was genuinely happy. Planning frosting and felony in the very same breath, so certain the week would end her way that she was already spending the relief in advance. She had absolutely no idea the loan underneath her Thursday plan was already legally dead, that her little paperwork thing was going to be a room full of people waiting for her signature the way a scale waits patiently for weight. There was still one piece I genuinely couldn't see yet, what exactly Sunday night itself was actually for. Tuesday, my father drove out to my townhouse alone, which had maybe happened 4 times total in the previous 5 years. He brought a small box of wood screws for a shelf I'd mentioned once, months earlier, and stood on my doormat turning his cap over in his hands like a man waiting at a rail crossing. I didn't invite him in. We talked about nothing for 2 minutes, the heat, Maya's scooter, whether the Hornets had a shot this season. The whole time his eyes kept sliding off my face and landing on my front door, the hinge side first, then the strike plate, then the brand new brushed nickel deadbolt I'd installed the week before, obviously fresh. I watched him notice it, and I watched him actively work at not being seen noticing it. Put in new hardware, he finally said, so carefully casual it nearly broke my heart on the spot. Locks were out, I said. He nodded at the deadbolt the way you'd nod at a dog you weren't entirely sure of. Good thinking. Always were the careful one. And then my father actually looked at me, really looked, for the first time in longer than I could remember. For about 2 full seconds, something moved behind his face. Something with real weight to it. Something almost like a warning searching desperately for a door out. It never found one. He handed me the screws, said his goodbyes, and drove off in the same truck he's had since I was in high school. I stood on that mat and let myself feel the exact size of the mistake. He'd seen the new lock. That information was heading straight home to my mother, straight into whatever machine was running this whole operation. And whatever Sunday night was actually for, that machine would now quietly adjust. That night, my new doorbell camera pinged at 9:41 p.m. The dark green sedan again, rolling slow through the lot, no stops this time, its 3rd pass in 2 weeks. Whatever was coming now knew about the deadbolt too. Good, I remember thinking, surprising even myself. Let them bring better tools. Wednesday night, my kitchen hosted the strangest planning meeting of my entire life. A physical therapist, a retired postal inspector, and a county detective, drinking decaf around a table with one of Maya's crayon drawings of Chief the cat still taped to the fridge behind us. Frank brought the piece of intel that finally snapped the last part of this puzzle into place, his old locksmith contact downtown, 31 years of favors running deep in every direction, had heard about a commercial job booked for Sunday evening. A full rekey at a Selwyn Court address, ordered by a woman describing herself as the family's property manager. The unit's owner, she'd explained, was away at a family event, and the family handles her affairs while she's out. Detective Anand set down her mug. "That's the window," she said. "She needs whatever's in that firebox before Thursday's closing. Originals, the deed, whatever the title company flagged. Your birthday dinner isn't really a party, Dana. It's an alibi she's throwing for you." It was strange, hearing it said out loud that plainly. My mother had scheduled my own birthday the way you'd schedule a distraction for someone else entirely. Detective Anand laid out the law in her tidy, methodical rows. A rekey ordered by a non-owner. Physical entry into the unit. That's the exact moment a paper case becomes handcuffs, an overt act, in progress, witnessed. If they attempt it, we're already there. Nobody touches your home. Then everyone looked at me, because the plan had one moving part left, and the moving part was me. I said it before anyone else had to. The only night they're absolutely certain I'll be out of that townhouse, with witnesses accounting for every minute of my evening, is Sunday. So I go to my own birthday dinner. I smile. I eat the cake. I want one thing understood clearly here, because it matters. I set no trap of my own invention. I suggested nothing, dangled nothing, encouraged nothing. They built this entire schedule themselves, booked the locksmith themselves, chose my birthday themselves. All I ever declined to do was warn them. Frank walked Detective Anand out. At the door she turned back. "Sunday night," she said, "we'll be in your parents' driveway before the candles are even lit." I couldn't sleep after they left, so I did what I always do instead of sleeping. I finished a chart. Every piece of evidence was already in the binder by then except for one final cross-check I'd been quietly putting off, because I already knew it would cost me something. I laid my grandmother Eleanor's statements side by side with the family calendar from those same 2 years, and the pattern told its story in 3 clean acts. Act 1, 2018, Eleanor moves in, the caregiver card appears on her account, the withdrawals begin, modest and plausible. Act 2, 2019, the amounts creep upward, and here's the detail that genuinely stopped me cold. Twice that year, the statements show declined attempts, the account briefly locked, then unlocked again within days. She fought back. 83 years old, no computer, no ally living under that roof, and my grandmother still managed to call somebody and lock that account down twice. And twice, somebody with a caregiver card and a honeyed phone voice talked the bank into opening it right back up. Act 3, 2020, the withdrawals level out and stay steady, right up until the very last one, 5 days before her heart finally gave out. And threaded through every single act of it, the one thing that finally made me set the pen down for good, she never once stopped protecting that certificate of deposit. $32,000, locked years deep, completely untouchable without her own signature delivered in person. The one fortress a careful old schoolteacher managed to build that a daughter-in-law's sweetness could never quite talk open. That's the exact money that eventually came to me. That's the money sitting under my own townhouse right now. My mother wanted back inside my apartment before Thursday's closing, back into my firebox, back after my papers, and I finally understood, with total clarity, that in her own private accounting, she probably didn't even think of it as stealing. She thought of it as collecting. My grandmother's last fortress had simply grown new walls, and the same woman with the same honeyed voice was standing at the gate again, absolutely certain the quiet ones would eventually hand over the keys. Thursday I turned my townhouse from a home into a position, and I did it legally, calmly, and with receipts for every single piece of it. A better deadbolt already sat on the front door, and now a doorbell camera went up above the mat, watching everything, my door, my right, no permission required from anyone, which felt genuinely poetic given everything else going on. The sliding door out back got a steel security bar. And then I did the part I'm proudest of in this entire story, the part that made Frank laugh, his gravelly retired inspector laugh, when I finally told him about it. I emptied the firebox completely. Every real document, the deed, birth certificates, my social security card, the certified copies of the forged power of attorney, my grandmother's old savings certificate, went straight into a safe deposit box downtown, right next to a duplicate copy of the entire binder. The gray firebox itself stayed exactly where it had always lived, on the closet shelf, plainly visible from the bedroom doorway, weighing exactly what it always weighed, because I filled it with nothing but old junk mail, expired coupons, and one single sheet of blank printer paper. If someone came looking for my paper life, they would find precisely what they had earned. Nothing at all. I stood in that closet doorway admiring my little gray decoy and understood, in a distant sort of way, that I had just built a trap without yet knowing exactly who would walk into it, or exactly when. That answer arrived Sunday evening, by phone, wrapped in frosting, just as I'd suspected it would. There was one more thing I found that same week, though, that I hadn't planned for at all. Doing a final pass through the binder the way I do a last set of vitals before shift change, I found a page I'd nearly skimmed past, a credit bureau notice dated 5 weeks earlier. A hard inquiry, an application-triggered pull from a credit card company. And the name on that inquiry was not Dana Whitfield. It was Maya Whitfield. My daughter. 8 years old. A social security number I had personally watched get issued at a hospital admissions desk. And 5 weeks earlier, somebody had typed it into an application. The playbook wasn't just still open. It had a brand new chapter already underway, and that chapter was my child. The exact same move they'd run on me back in 2015, plant the account early, keep the mail close, harvest it decades down the road. They hadn't even waited for Maya to lose her last baby tooth. I stood in that closet doorway admiring my little gray decoy and understood, in a distant sort of way, that I had just built a trap without yet knowing exactly who would walk into it, or exactly when. That answer arrived Sunday evening, by phone, wrapped in frosting, just as I'd suspected it would. There was one more thing I found that same week, though, that I hadn't planned for at all. Doing a final pass through the binder the way I do a last set of vitals before shift change, I found a page I'd nearly skimmed past, a credit bureau notice dated 5 weeks earlier. A hard inquiry, an application-triggered pull from a credit card company. And the name on that inquiry was not Dana Whitfield. It was Maya Whitfield. My daughter. 8 years old. A social security number I had personally watched get issued at a hospital admissions desk. And 5 weeks earlier, somebody had typed it into an application. The playbook wasn't just still open. It had a brand new chapter already underway, and that chapter was my child. The exact same move they'd run on me back in 2015, plant the account early, keep the mail close, harvest it decades down the road. They hadn't even waited for Maya to lose her last baby tooth. Detective Anand called back Friday afternoon for the final walkthrough, and it was shorter than a standard patient handoff at shift change. Her team would be positioned near Selwyn Court by 6 o'clock Sunday evening, 2 unmarked cars covering the front door and the patio slider. Frank had formally requested permission to drink tea at his own front window that night, which Anand granted with the first laugh I'd heard out of her, short and quickly reined back in. My job was a list of exactly nothing. Arrive at 6:30. Be seen. Be ordinary. Phone face down, face fully on. One rule, Anand said, and her voice practically put its glasses back on as she said it. Whatever happens at that table, whatever gets said, whoever stands up, wherever Tyler goes, let it happen. Don't warn them. Don't stall them. Don't help them either. You're not an officer tonight. You're not bait. You're a guest at your own birthday party. The only thing you can possibly do wrong tonight is participate. I told her I'd spent 33 years training for the exact role of a woman at a table saying absolutely nothing. She said, "Then go graduate," and hung up, because Detective Anand exits every single phone call like it's a patient she's already finished treating. Sunday morning came up hot and bright, an ordinary July day with sprinklers ticking somewhere in the distance, and the strangest part of the whole day was how completely normal the morning managed to feel. I made pancakes. Maya ate 3 and negotiated hard for a 4th. We took her scooter out to the shared driveway, where Frank was already stationed on his porch with coffee, pretending he wasn't watching my building while very obviously watching my building. Maya found her balance, corrected twice, and did her first full lap without putting a foot down, while Chief the cat supervised the whole event from the railing like a race official. Frank raised his mug in salute. Maya looked back at me with her whole face open. "Mom, did you see?" "I saw everything, baby. I saw absolutely everything." Packing her overnight bag for her friend's house felt like the only part of the entire plan that actually mattered. Pajamas, toothbrush, the stuffed rabbit she insists she's outgrown but never leaves behind anyway. Halfway into the car seat she asked, "It's your birthday, but I get a sleepover? Do I still get cake?" I told her the friend's family was making brownies, which unquestionably outrank cake, and that grandma's party would be boring anyway, all grown-ups, no games. She accepted the trade instantly. At the door I hugged her longer than the moment strictly called for, and she squirmed free the way 8-year-olds are supposed to, which was correct, and I drove away with both hands steady on the wheel. Back home, the townhouse sat clean and quiet. Firebox on its shelf, full of nothing. New deadbolt gleaming. Camera awake over the mat. I laid out my dress on the bed, the navy one, good for sitting perfectly still in, and looked at the whole arrangement for a long moment. The evidence was banked. My child was safe. The table was set. All that remained was the one part only I could actually do. Show up, and be lied to beautifully, one final time before we walk into that dining room together. One thing you should know. I had spent 7 weeks pretending everything was completely fine. Smiling through Sunday dinners, passing potatoes to the exact same people who had opened a credit account in my 8-year-old daughter's name. If you have ever sat at a table and acted normal to protect what's actually yours, you already know this part of the story down in your bones. Stay with me. The next hour took 9 years to build. Subscribe now if you're planning on staying until those locks finally come off tonight, because from this point forward, nobody at that table leaves the way they walked in. My mother opened the front door before I'd even finished knocking, which she has done my entire life, as if the house itself reports directly to her. "There's my birthday girl." She smelled like her usual perfume and chocolate frosting, and she hugged me with both arms, and I hugged her back and felt, through the familiar wool of her cardigan, exactly how small she actually is. This woman who had quietly rearranged 9 years of my life using a landline and a pen. The house was staged from top to bottom, the never-used tablecloth ironed to a shine, the good china out, candles lined up along the sideboard, the chocolate cake boxed on the counter like a hostage waiting for release. Aunt Pam got to me second, held me at arm's length, told me I looked tired in the way that actually means loved, and slipped me a card she clearly didn't want my mother to see, because Pam has always understood the unspoken house rules better than anyone else in this family. The cousins arrived with wine. My father was stationed at the grill window, beer label already half peeled, and when he said, "Hey, kiddo, happy birthday," he said it to a spot just slightly left of my actual eyes. Tyler came in last, freshly showered, boots traded for sneakers, and he ruffled my hair the way he's done since I was 9 years old, and I let him, and something in my chest quietly took a note and filed it away for later. Dinner ran exactly the way my mother's productions always run, on time, on script, applause cued at the right moments. Roast chicken, the potatoes Tyler likes, rolls in the cloth-lined basket that only ever comes out for company. My mother conducted from the head of the table, refilling glasses, redirecting conversation, trimming every exchange back toward pleasant, and I ate and laughed on cue and monitored the entire room the way I'd monitor a patient's vitals during a difficult session. My father was quiet even for my father, building a small tower of beer label shavings beside his plate. Tyler kept sneaking looks at his phone in his lap, then at the kitchen clock, then at my mother, a triangle he flew maybe 5 separate times between the chicken and the salad. Aunt Pam told her annual story about the possum that got into her attic, which somehow gets funnier every year. Then my mother stood, tapped her glass with her ring finger, and gave the toast. She's good, I want that on the record, because it's true. She is genuinely, naturally good at this. She talked about family being the one thing that truly lasts, about roots and branches, about how proud she was of our Dana, our therapist, and the cousins made warm approving sounds, and Pam beamed, and my father studied the tablecloth like it was scripture. She landed it with her arms spread wide across the whole room. Everything you have, Dana, came from this family. I raised my glass along with everyone else, looked my mother directly in the eye, and drank the whole thing down. If you'd been watching from the doorway, you'd have seen a daughter toasting her own lucky life. Only 2 people at that table actually knew what that sentence really meant, and one of us was smiling into a wine glass while the other kept checking the kitchen clock, 6:40 now, with the busy, counting eyes of a woman whose evening had a very specific second act already scheduled. Between the chicken and the cake, my phone buzzed once against my leg. Detective Anand and I had exactly one agreed-upon rule for that evening: nothing tonight unless it truly couldn't wait. I excused myself to the powder room off the hallway, locked the door, and read the message. 2 photographs. The first was the certified power of attorney, but a clean scan this time, pulled directly from the notary's own retained file. The smeared second witness signature finally resolved into real handwriting. Witness 2, April 9, 2019, in a slanting hand I would have known absolutely anywhere on this earth, Tyler Harold Whitfield. The second photo was a loan payoff record from April 2019, a $9,000 truck loan, Tyler's, settled in full in a single lump payment from an account belonging to Harold and Renata Whitfield, 11 days after the notary date. Anand's caption underneath was one line: confirmed this afternoon. Thought you should have it before you look at him again tonight. I stood in my mother's powder room holding that phone over the little seashell soaps nobody's allowed to actually use, and I did the math I had never once wanted to do. The exact week I was lying in a hospital bed with a concussion, my own brother had stood at a notary's counter and sworn under oath that he personally watched me sign. And the truck he'd washed and bragged about at every family dinner since, best decision I ever made, getting that loan paid off. I'd been riding in the bed of that lie for 4 years without knowing it. Tyler, who taught me to parallel park. $9,000. That's the number my brother apparently sold me for. Something in my chest didn't break the way I'd braced for it to. It just went quiet and efficient and filed him under a brand new tab. I flushed for the sake of the audience, washed my hands with the regular soap, and walked back out to the table smiling. My mother was already leaning toward my father's ear, and the whole room seemed to slow down, because somehow I knew the sentence before she ever said it out loud. The candles were going on to the cake by then, Aunt Pam counting them out loud, the cousins arguing over whether 33 needs the full 33 or just a symbolic few. And that's when my mother leaned over to my father, dropped her voice down to the register she genuinely believes is private, and said it. Since everyone's here, have Tyler go change the locks at her place tonight. 10 seconds, maybe, start to finish. My father's jaw worked once, like a man swallowing a pill with no water. He didn't look at her, didn't look at me, gave the smallest nod I have ever seen a grown man produce, and touched Tyler's shoulder as he reached past him for the coffee carafe. And Tyler, my brother, witness number 2, best thing I ever did getting that loan gone, set his napkin down beside his plate, stood up, and announced he needed to take a call about a job estimate. He was already thumbing his keyring out of his pocket, one shiny, brand new, and used key on it that fit absolutely nothing yet. Aunt Pam called after him, Tyler, we're about to do the cake. And he said, 2 minutes, Pam, start without me, and the screen door clapped shut behind him, and his headlights swung out of the driveway heading toward Selwyn Court, toward my home, toward a firebox full of expired coupons, a deadbolt he had no idea existed, a doorbell camera already awake, and 2 unmarked cars parked in the summer dark with their engines quietly off. I did the hardest, longest shift of my entire career at that table, and it lasted exactly 41 minutes, monitoring a patient who had absolutely no idea she was already coding. I ate my slice of chocolate cake. I told Aunt Pam it was the best one that bakery had ever made, and I meant every word of it. My mother relaxed by visible degrees, chattering about Thursday being a fresh start for everyone, and I agreed that it would be. The kitchen clock ticked forward. And when headlights finally swung back up the driveway, they came in fast. The front door opened hard enough to knock the wreath crooked, and my brother came into that dining room the way trauma cases come through emergency room doors, moving too fast, already too late. His face had gone the color of hospital bedsheets. His keyring hung from one finger, upside down. He crossed straight to my mother's chair without a single word to anyone else, bent to her ear, and tried to whisper. But the room had already gone completely silent the second they all saw his face, the kind of silence that turns any whisper into a full broadcast, and every single person at that table heard my brother say, "Mom, there were police. Police at the townhouse. They'd stopped the locksmith right there in the lot. They had paperwork. A warrant. A detective. They already knew Tyler's name the second he stepped out of his truck." He swallowed hard. They knew about Thursday. The room did not explode. That's the thing nobody ever tells you about detonations inside a family, the first full second is pure vacuum. Aunt Pam's hand froze halfway to her mouth. One of the cousins set down a fork with a click that sounded like a gavel coming down. My father went gray around the lips and very carefully placed both hands flat on the tablecloth, like a man bracing a table that wasn't actually moving at all. And my mother smiled. It hung there on her face a full second past its expiration date, the hostess smile slowly dying in place while her eyes swept the table doing rapid arithmetic. Who heard what? How much? What could still possibly be managed? I watched the exact moment that math came back completely unsolvable, then my father's phone rang against the wood, far too loud, and he flinched like it had actual teeth. The screen sat face up where everyone could read the caller ID clearly, the lender's regional office, calling on a Sunday night, 2 days ahead of schedule. He didn't answer it. It rang itself all the way out to voicemail in front of 11 completely silent people. And into that ringing, my mother finally turned, not to her husband, not to her son standing wrecked at her shoulder, but to me. Still seated. Napkin in my lap. Cake finished. Because she already knew, before a single piece of evidence was ever laid on the table, exactly who had done this. My mother looked down the length of that table and found the one person who had finally stopped being managed, and I watched her understand it completely, and I did not look away. She stood up so fast her chair barked against the floor. "What did you do?" Low at first, then rising through the octaves as the hostess act burned entirely away and whatever lived underneath it came out plainly into the open. "Dana, what did you do? You called the police on your own family, on your mother, on your father," Aunt Pam said Renata and got a hand sliced through the air for it. "Everything I have ever done, I have done for this family. You ungrateful, everything you have came from this family." And there it was, the toast again, delivered this time at full volume with real venom underneath it. I stayed in my chair. I kept my hands folded on my napkin and used the exact voice I use at 2 in the morning when a family is panicking at a bedside monitor, the one that doesn't need to rise because it doesn't need to. "You're right, Mom. Even the debt." The sentence landed in that room the way instruments go quiet mid-song. "I didn't call the police on my family," I said. "I filed a report about 2 people who forged my signature while I was in a hospital bed with a concussion." My mother's mouth opened, and I set one single piece of paper on the tablecloth, face up, and slid it toward the middle where everyone could reach it. Not the binder. Just one page. "That's a credit inquiry from 5 weeks ago," I said, still level. "Run on an 8-year-old. Pass it around." Aunt Pam got to it first. I watched my aunt read her great-niece's name and age, and set the page back down like it had burned her fingers. "Renata," she said, in a voice I had never once heard from her, "she is 8 years old." My mother didn't even look at the page. That told the entire table more than the page itself ever could have. She swung between registers, hunting for one that still worked. Tears first. I have sacrificed everything for this family. Nobody knows what I've carried. Then blame. Your father handles the accounts. Ask him. And my father, Gray, both hands still flat against the table, chose that exact moment to say the only honest sentence I have ever heard him volunteer in his entire life, unprompted, to anyone. She's telling the truth. All of it. He didn't look up while he said it, and he sat back afterward like the words had cost him his entire skeleton. It was late. It was 9 years late. But the room heard it. Tyler stood wrecked over by the china cabinet, and I looked at him last. $9,000, Tyler. For your signature. You want to know what it actually bought? Go ask my daughter. My mother made her final stand the way generals always do, from ground that had already fallen out from under her. She pulled herself up straight, chin lifted, and played the one card that had won every single hand at this table for 33 years running. I am your mother. This is my house, and we are your family, and family doesn't need permission. I stood then, finally, unhurried, and lifted my purse off the back of my chair. It does now, I said. It's called a warrant. Nobody followed me into the kitchen except Aunt Pam. I took the cake box off the counter, more than half of it still left, boxed up beautifully, and my aunt, bless her forever, didn't say a single word about it. She just opened the back door for me. I bought my own birthday cake once, when I was 14, I told her, with babysitting money, because that year the budget was tight. Tonight I'm just taking back what's actually mine. Pam put both hands on my face. You call me, she said. Whenever. I mean it, Dana Ann. Behind us in the dining room, my mother's voice had already found her phone, and my father's name, and the word lawyer, in exactly that order. I drove the 14 minutes home with the windows down, the cake belted carefully into the passenger seat like a good citizen. Selwyn Court was quiet again by the time I pulled in, the locksmith's van long gone, one unmarked car still parked dark at the far end of the lot with the patience of something that always eventually gets paid. At his front window, backlit by a reading lamp, Frank stood with a mug in his hand, and as I passed under the streetlight he gave me the small, formal, 2-inch nod of an investigator clocking out at the end of a case. Chief's tail thumped once against the glass beside him. My new deadbolt turned like silk under my key. The first door that had ever been entirely, only mine. The following 2 weeks moved exactly the way real justice actually moves, on paper, at printer speed. Charges were filed. Identity fraud, forgery, and theft against my mother. Forgery and complicity against my father. The search warrant brought that manila folder out of the china cabinet in an evidence bag, practice pages, and all, and I'm told the detectives on the unit passed it around like a museum artifact for a solid week. Tyler came in with a lawyer on the 3rd day and told them everything, the notary counter, the truck loan, Sunday night, and signed on as a cooperating witness, which bought him a misdemeanor charge and a debt no court calendar will ever be able to schedule a payment plan for. The $82,000 loan never funded. My townhouse title stayed completely clean. The $11,600 came off my credit, account by account, each deletion letter filed carefully behind its own red tab in the binder. At her arraignment, my mother pleaded not guilty and told the judge, with what I'm told was total sincerity, that this was all simply a family misunderstanding. The system she had quietly gamed for 9 years finally opened her file and read it properly, front to back. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in October, my entire world fit inside one small parking lot, and it was more than enough. Maya does full laps around the shared island now, faster every week, cornering like she was born doing it, while Frank calls out lap times he's clearly inventing on the spot, and Chief referees the whole thing from the grass with total professional indifference. My friend from the clinic drops by with coffee and stays on my front step for an hour most weekends. My mail comes to exactly one address now, mine, and I open every single envelope on the day it arrives, which sounds like a small thing unless you've lived through this exact story, in which case you already know it's actually the entire prize. Aunt Pam calls every Sunday afternoon now, usually after church. Sometimes we talk about the case. Mostly we talk about possums in her attic, and Maya spelling tests, and that's its own kind of quiet medicine. My cousins send funny cards on random occasions for no particular reason. Family, it turns out, was never really the people sitting at the head of the table. It's the ones who actually stand up from it once the truth finally arrives. I don't take calls from my parents' lawyer. There's one number I never bothered saving that I've let ring itself out twice now, without a flicker of guilt. Tyler texted me in September, long, careful, sorry woven into every paragraph. I read the whole thing standing at my kitchen counter, then put the phone face down and finished making dinner, and I haven't answered, and I haven't blocked him either. Some doors you don't slam shut. You just quietly stop oiling the hinges. As for Maya, I told her the truth in a size she could actually carry. Grandma did something dishonest with Mommy's name, and it's grown-up trouble, and none of it, not one single ounce of it, was ever her fault, and the people who love her don't need her name to prove it to them. She thought about that for exactly one day, asked if Chief could come to her birthday party, and moved on entirely, because 8-year-olds have absolutely perfect instincts for what actually matters in the end. Her credit stays frozen until the day she turns 18. My grandmother Eleanor's old savings certificate hangs framed above my desk now, not for the money it once represented, but for the signature, hers, and only ever hers, on her own paper, in her own hand. Last week Maya asked why it was hanging up there. I told her a smart, careful lady kept exactly one thing completely safe her whole life, and then gave it to us. Like a treasure? She asked. Exactly like a treasure, baby. The chocolate cake, for the record, was gone within 2 days, and I have ordered my own from that same bakery every July since. 3 layers, chocolate, don't argue with me about it. It tastes better, somehow, when your name on the receipt is the only place your name is currently working for anyone. I used to believe love meant handing people your keys and simply hoping for the best. Now I know that real love is the one thing on this entire earth that never needs to practice your signature. That's my story. 9 years of statements, 1 manila folder, and a locksmith who never got the chance to drill a single hole. If this reminded you to go pull your own credit report today, or to freeze your child's credit before you finish watching this video, take that feeling seriously and go do it. If somebody you love needs to hear this story, send it their way right now. Drop a comment and tell me exactly what you would have done differently, or the same. And if you're new here and you're drawn to stories about family financial betrayal, forged documents, identity theft, and quiet, patient people who finally learn how to say no without ever raising their voice, hit subscribe, because this channel is built entirely around stories exactly like this one.